Yeah.
most likely.
So Bretton Woods III is a term that some have used to describe the the changing or the new global financial system that we're in today. So Bretton Woods one was, actually Bretton Woods was the location of a meeting that happened in 1944 by the Allied powers during the Second World War to kind of hash out how the countries of Europe, which were completely devastated after the war, would create a financial basis for rebuilding their economies because they were all broke. The United
Mm.
States had three-fourths of the world's gold at that point because European countries had paid the United States for arms in gold. And so, but the United States also realized that, if we have all the collateral, then nobody can trade with us. And so we don't have any trade partners, and we need trade partners to grow our own economy. And so we needed to actually come to an agreement about what the global economic system would look like so that we could all rebuild. Um, and at that time, the gold standard was adopted. The U.S. dollar was pegged to a certain amount of gold, and many European currencies were in turn pegged to the U.S. dollar. Um, that gold peg was became a problem for the United States because we very quickly started outspending our ability to exchange dollars for gold, mostly by continuing to wage war. So, after the Second World War, we fought the Korean War, which put our country into debt for the first time since the World War. Then we fought in Vietnam. We fought in other conflicts, and that progressively, indebted the U.S. Treasury. And so in 1971, President Nixon announced the closure of the gold window. We would no longer convert US dollars for gold. Um, that was a big shock to the world. And, that was what created the regime of fiat currency that is not backed by anything other than sovereign fiat or will. So there's no commodity backing the value of the US dollar, and in turn any currency that's pegged to the US dollar. That was Bretton Woods 2, so sort of starting in 1971. That world order could only last as long as American military strength was powerful enough to ensure a fully American-led world order. And as long as we could kind of shadow back the dollar with oil. That was an agreement shortly after the closure of the gold window. We struck an agreement with Saudi Arabia to exclusively price oil in US dollars. And so these petrodollars became, in effect, oil came to kind of substitute for gold as a commodity backing for the dollar, but not in any direct way, in more of a symbolic way.
Mm-hmm.
That order has been fraying. The United States, like many military empires, vastly overextended itself, overspent on conflicts that it couldn't win. It didn't win. Most recently, Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, trillions of dollars were spent on those conflicts that ended in U.S. withdrawal. In the meantime, other countries have begun to push back against U.S. control of the oil, in effect, trade, global oil trade, by trading in other currencies other than US dollars. And so that's undermined then the petrodollar basis for trusting the US dollar as a kind of stable store of value. And so now what we're seeing is a collapse in the confidence that people have in the American sovereign fiat that backs the dollar. So we're seeing a crisis of confidence in the state, in the American state, and an active push by America's rivals to remove themselves from dependence on the US controlled global financial system so that they can transact freely without having to go through the US banking system, which they have to do if they're transacting in dollars. And so all of that has led to Bretton Woods III, which is the era that we're in today, meaning that the collapse of the petrodollar as a global reserve system is well underway. With that, a collapse of US military hegemony, the rise of BRICS countries in political power, economic power, military power, and in an alternative currency. So the BRICS countries are developing their own SDR, special drawing rights currency that's backed by a basket of different national currencies and commodities. So it's a return to commodity money. And the rise of Bitcoin, which is a non-state, non-aligned, global, neutral digital currency. And so what's interesting about Bretton Woods III is that, it reflects the extent to which any currency issued by a government is a political tool. It is controlled and instrumentalized by the government issuing that currency. And a multipolar world in which people now have a choice. Do they want to transact in the dollar, which is the political tool of the US government, or the yuan or the ruble or the new BRICS currency, which is a political tool of those governments? Well, is there a possibility that we could have a money that's not the political tool of some government? Well, that is Bitcoin. And this is why Bitcoin is so important for human liberty.